Hello everybody, welcome to episode 131 of Show For You, which today we'll be going over the series Blood Sea. Now, this series just introduced you to the main character. Her name is, Saya Kisaragi. And she's essentially your normal little schoolgirl who is is different because at night what she does is she is a shrine maiden, and what she goes about doing is destroying these entities known as Elder Baron with this sacred blade, which is the only weapon that can destroy the Elder Baron. So the first 3 episodes of the show play out pretty normally. We see Saya walking to school and all of that, singing along. She stops by a cafe that's one of the few cafes in our very small town called Cafe Guimauve, and Guimauve. And at this cafe, we have a very odd character by the name of Fumito. He's almost pedophilic because apparently he's around the same age as Tadayoshi, which is Saya's father, and he's just kind of odd. Like, I got odd vibes about him from the beginning of the series. But yeah, so he seems to have some odd attraction to Saya and all that, even though Saya is a high schooler. And we just see as this plays out. She, like I said, she goes to school, has interactions with her friends, and then at night she ultimately ends up fighting Elder Baron. And we see that at most of the time she kind of struggles, but then eventually, for some reason, her eyes swap to this red, like, I guess almost kind of like Naruto's look when he has like the Nine Tails imbued in him, like that slit and the red eye. So yeah, it ends up turning into that. And we see as she fights him, and then usually beats him pretty quickly after that. Yeah. So we see as that plays out, and then it all progresses, and we learn about the names of some of the school members and all that. We learn of Yuka, we learn of Nono and Nene, who are twins. We learn of Tokizane, who's kind of a love interest of Saya's. We see as he's kind of slowly growing more attached to Saya, and we see Itsuki, who is kind of pursuing Saya as well. But yeah, so we see this, and then ultimately we get to episode 4. And episode 4 is kind of where things change, because we see everything kind of plays out normally at school. She still goes to Cafe Guimauve and all that. And one of the big things that Saya likes at Cafe Guimauve is Guimauve, which is like a marshmallow treat thing, and coffee. She loves coffee. She drinks coffee every single day. But yeah, so we see this in episode 4 gets, and then we get to our sequence for fighting the Elder Baron for this episode. And during this, we see as this one is more advanced. It's actually attacking humans. It spawns like this river area, and it kills 3 humans. Ultimately, yes, Saya is able to defeat it, but during this fight, it mentions something about upholding the Covenant. And we see slowly as we actually learn nothing about the Covenant. So we get to episode 5, and it continues to progress. And then ultimately, one day after school, one of the twins, Nono and Nene, I can't remember exactly why she ended up coming to Saya's house, but Nono ends up coming to Saya's house after school one day because she's worried about these missing persons incidents, because people are continuing going missing around the city of Ukushima, which is their village they live in. But yeah, so Ukushima ends up having many of these missing persons incidents, and Saya knows that it's Elder Baron getting to them, but no one else knows this. No one really knows about the existence of Elder Baron besides Tadayoshi, which is her father, and Saya. So yeah, we see as it slowly progresses out, and Nono ends up coming to Saya's shrine house one day. And in this, we see as she comes here, and they're just kind of talking, but then a Elder Baron comes out of nowhere. And ultimately, Saya's fighting it off. But then Nono is ultimately caught in the crossfire, and she is killed by this Elder Baron. And it is a brutal death. Like, when people die or like ripped apart in Blood Sea, it's brutal. Like, you can see the blood vessels, like nerves sticking out of their like dismembered limbs and stuff like that. And it's freaky. But yeah, so we see she gets killed and her head is bitten off and everything. And then Saya still has to go to school after this, and she goes to school for the next couple of days, and we see as people are talking about how Nono has been missing for 2 or so days, and how Nene has not been coming to school because of this. And so we see as this continues to play out until ultimately one day Saya's walking down the road and she runs into Nene, but Nene has her hair in the form that Nono usually has, because what they do is they wear their braids like at the side of their head right there, but it's parted on a different side so you can tell the difference between them. However, Nene is wearing her hair in the form that Nono does. And with this, Saya knows that Nono is dead, so she calls her Nene. But Nene is like, how do you know it's not Nono? And ultimately we see that a Elder Baron ends up sprouting from beneath her in like a shadow form. And ultimately, it starts to ravage the Okushima area. It starts killing people all around, putting spikes through him. It's just like a shadow beast. And it's going around killing all. But ultimately, Saya is able to defeat him, but not before it absorbs Nene into it. And then once she defeats it, it blasts out all of her dismembered parts and everything. So this is once again a very traumatic instance for Saya. And so we see as she has to continue about doing her thing, ultimately their class is canceled for a while because they don't want anyone returning to the school, possibly due to another Elder Baron attack. They don't know it. They don't want any more people to go missing nor dying. So, also one thing that I forgot to mention is that average people can see the Elder Baron. The Elder Baron aren't like ghosts or anything like that because they can be seen. They can be seen by people, as we saw with Nono seeing it, as we see with the people around the town seeing the one that Nene was attacked by, and all of that, and also the ones we saw in episode 4, which were in the water. So yeah, so after that, we end up seeing as one day, class is called back into session. And so everyone ends up going to class, and they all meet up, and they're all obviously very sorrowed by all this. And then they begin to look out the window, and they see that there is something out there. This is an Elder Baron. An Elder Baron has come to the school, and it ultimately ends up jumping through the window, and it starts attacking. It starts attacking everyone, and like no one is safe. So yeah, we see as people start to get attacked and everything, and then as time progresses, ultimately we see as some like the more main characters were killed off. We see as Yuka is ultimately killed by this Elder Baron while Saya's trying to fight him off. But Saya honestly kind of sucks at defending people because she does barely any help in beating all these people. But I should mention, one of the odd things that I noticed though is that her class was the only one at school. The school was empty besides their class. No one else was in the school, which was kind of odd, and that does come into play later on. But yeah, so we see as she continues to fight it off until ultimately she ends up going up to the rooftop with it, where she continues to fight it, but it ultimately ends up killing Itsuki as well. And she then is able to ultimately defeat the Elder Baron. One thing I also forgot to mention was that Saya has an increased, what do we call it? Healing capacity, not healing capacity, but a health factor. Her health factor is very high, and she can heal at a very quick rate. So through all the wounds that she's getting at these battles, she usually heals within a day. But yeah, so ultimately this ends up breaking down Saya pretty bad. This is very brutal. Like, I believe it's 2 episodes, and it ends up breaking her down pretty bad. But yeah, so she ends up going back home until one day she's at Cafe Guimauve, where she ends up meeting with her teacher. Her name is Kanako. It's like Sutsuri or something like that. And I'm just going to call her Kanako because that's easier to say. But yeah, she ends up meeting with Kanako. And we see that her teacher, Kanako, is wanting to research more about these possibly, I guess, eldritch beings that she's been interested in. And we saw that she was interested in them during this one time before either Nene or Nono died, where she was talking about it in class, and they were telling ghost stories and stuff like that, and ultimately Nene ended up telling us, Nono ended up telling a story that she was like, yeah, if you tell the story, you'll die, and that ended up happening. But yeah, so we see Kanako talking about this, and obviously, Saya has a reservation. She's like, my father's not home, I can't show you this unless he's here, but she's like, I won't be long, I won't destroy anything. So Saya ultimately ends up taking Kanako to this area, where Kanako starts doing her research and looking into the Elder Baron. Well, not really necessarily the Elder Baron, but like supernatural topics. But yeah, so ultimately this ends up continuing along until Kanako ends up kind of snapping on Saya. She ends up leading her outside, and we see Nene and Nono. They are alive. And we see as Saya breaks down, because it's revealed that she has been fooled. What has been going on here is essentially a Truman Show effect, in which everyone in the town is paid actors. All of them are actors, and all of them have been fooling Saya. We see that Kanako was in fact a paid actor. Nene and Nono are a paid actor. We see that Tokezane ends up pulling up as a paid actor. And yeah, so we see all of this. And with this, we see as Saya breaks down. We see as all of them pull up and they're all hating on Saya. And once the big nail in the coffin thing that happens is Fumito shows up, the owner of Cafe Guimauve. And with this, he ends up revealing that he is kind of the headmaster of all this. He's kind of the main honcho. And while he pulls up here, we see as a Elder Baron ends up popping out. And it appears like it's going to start attacking people, but it actually doesn't. And everyone kind of moves away so they can talk and all that about payment and everything. Because, like, we see that Yuka is alive. We see that Itsuki is alive. And they ultimately ended up were the ones telling Fumito about this, because we saw that Nene, Nono, and Tokezane, and Kanako had revealed too early to Saya, like the information that she now learned about everything being fake. And so we see as they all pull up, and Fumito ends up revealing stuff. He ends up revealing that he has been doing this to learn more about Saya. And we see that he reveals that though they were all paid actors, the people that were in her classroom that died, they actually died. But because like the main characters of like Nene, Nono, Yuka, Itsuki, Tokizane, Kanako, they were like the doubles were put in for them because they were more important. So yeah, we see this, and we see Saya's just breaking down. She's like unable to speak or anything like that. And we see as Fumito starts to explain things to her, he reveals to Saya that in fact, the Sacred Blade is not an important weapon at all. It's a normal blade that can do anything. And he also reveals to her that she is a half demon, half elder, not half demon, but a half human, half elder baron. And with this, he is revealing that he has been lacing her coffee with elder baron blood throughout all of like this time at this town. And we see that throughout this, Saya has been believing that her mother was a shrine maiden before her, and that her father was like just a normal dude. And we also see that Saya, however, cannot remember what her mother was or anything about her mother, nor she can remember past being in Ukashima. We also see that prior on she had made a promise to someone, but each time she would think upon this promise, her head would start to act up, and this happens throughout multiple episodes. Her head starts to act up, and she gets like pains and everything, like migraines essentially. And we also see throughout it this little dog that keeps appearing. This little dog really isn't that important, but he keeps appearing, and he has a role to play. And he's the one who kind of tries to keep Saya like locked in throughout. But yeah, Fumito starts revealing this stuff, and he reveals that in fact everything was fake, and Saya has been planted with false memories, and that by putting the Elder Baron blood in the coffee, he's been trying to return her memories so that she can ultimately break down and have the capacity to kill humans, because she is essentially a weapon, and she can only kill Elder Baron, and she can only kill Elder Baron. Well, actually, I won't go into this because it doesn't get elaborated on until later on. But yeah, so he reveals all this stuff to her, and he also reveals that Tadayoshi is in fact not her father, that he is also a similar being unto her. But before anything else of this happens, he ends up releasing the Elder Baron from control, and it ends up doing some brutal kills. It ends up killing Nene and Nono, and one of them is, this is actually the scene that made me want to watch this, because I was like, oh my gosh, it's brutal. Ends up ripping one of the twins like in half, and like pulling their leg, like grabbing them by the legs and ripping them like that. And it's all brutal. He ends up killing Tokizane, he ends up killing Nene, Nono, and Itsuki also ends up getting killed. And we also see that, Kanako is killed. But yeah, so ultimately this leads to Saya being told to fight Tadayoshi. Well, it's actually Tadayoshi being told to fight Saya because Fumito has some control over him, and they end up fighting, but ultimately Saya ends up winning, and we see as Fumito ends up running off. And with this, he ends up progressing throughout the city and having everyone in the city that's left be slaughtered, so there's nothing left. And we see all this play out, and Saya continues to chase after him, where once Fumito is trying to flee in a helicopter, and Saya like, jumps up to attack him, but he shoots her in the face, blows side of her face off, and then she falls back to the thing. And we see as everything kind of ends, and then we move on to the movie part, which is Blood Seas the Last Dark. So with this, we see actually some more explanatory stuff. So we learn about, the movie opens with us seeing as Saya fights this Elder Baron who's in a city, where she ultimately comes in contact with this character by the name of Mana, who she saved from this Elder Baron, and she ends up revealing to her this organization called Sirit. And Sirit is an organization which is fighting against the Tower, which is the association which Fumito is a part of, and what he sanctioned his experiment under with Saya, to try and get her to kill people, and to try and make her like the perfect human Elder Baron hybrid thing. And so we see this, and they reveal that they are trying to progressively take down Fumito. We meet the characters of its name's Matsuo, and Fujimura, Mana, and Mogari. And Mogari is kind of the head of this, and he ends up revealing to Saya that he is in fact the cousin to Fumito, yet Fumito and him ultimately came to blows because Fumito ended up killing Mogari's whole family. And they reveal that they had a connection at Shrovetide. He ends up revealing that the Covenant, or what the Elder Barons kept talking about, was in fact an agreement between Elder Baron and Elder Baron and humans to allow Elder Baron to eat a select amount of people per year, and what you call it, Saya was breaking this covenant by killing the Elder Baron and keeping them from eating people that they were allowed to eat. And this is called the Shrovetide Covenant. Shrovetide was the thing that happened many years ago, in which the humans of the Nanahara and Magori family the Mogari family ended up meeting up and making not an alliance, but a covenant with the Elder Baron. Yeah, so we see all this play out, and ultimately they have one task force that is sent out to try and attack Fumito when he is giving a speech at a local high school, but ultimately this ends up failing and falling through. The Fumito there is actually a mirage, and we see that Elder Baron is spawned in there, and Saya has to fight it, but ultimately she ends up succeeding, and Mana's there as well, but she doesn't do much. She ultimately actually ends up hacking out of the area, and they all end up getting back to the main area of Sitter. And so, once they get there, they're sat and recovering, and then we see as the kind of story progresses until ultimately they are able to break into the, code for Seventh Heaven and the Tower. And with this, they end up breaking in and learn where Fumito actually is. So they go and attack this place, and ultimately Saya is able to push through until ultimately she ends up getting to Fumito. And with this, we see as she falls down right in front of Fumito, and Fumito's kind of standing there monologuing over her, and then we see as Mogari ends up pulling in. Mogari had actually been conspiring with Fumito from the beginning to get Saya here so they could continue to experiment on her because of how special she is as a specimen. And we see this, and Mogari ends up revealing how, I've been planning all this from the start. I had been fooling you. I had directly got in contact with Fumito once we figured out where he was. I had been using the kids who agreed to join Student just by keeping them vulnerable, releasing false rumors and stuff like that. And ultimately, he ends up speaking a little bit more, and he picks up Saya's sword, and he gets behind Fumito, and they're just kind of continuing to monologue. But then he ends up stabbing Fumito through the back, and he's like, you should have kept your eyes on me and all of that. But ultimately, Fumito, what he ends up doing is he ends up turning on Mogari, sends him away, and then ultimately he ends up wounding Mogari in such a way that he causes what is within Mogari to come out. Now he reveals that the Mogari clan are the only ones who have the ability to they are the only ones who have the ability to control Elder Baron, and how Saya is the only one who can break that connection of control because of her existence as a hybrid. So we see as ultimately he ends up raising Mogari into the sky, where ultimately he ends up extracting this ability to create a link between Elder Baron and humans. And so he ends up going over there to that and essentially fuses with it, and then he forms like this big kaiju thing. But yeah, so with this, we see Saya ultimately ends up escaping this poison that was slipped into her coffee by Mogari. That's why she collapsed when she got to Fumito, because he had slipped the poison in there. And so ends up getting this big kaiju-like fight where Saya ultimately ends up defeating it. It's also a really cool animated scene. That's one thing I forgot to mention, because between the 1 year that was the TV series and then the movie, the animation drastically improved. Like, it's crazy. It's night and day. And this one is honestly really cool because it mixes like 3D, like good 3D animation like you'd see in like a Pixar movie or something like that, and the anime art style. So it's really cool to see this. Ultimately, she ends up beating this kaiju pretty easily, and so she ends up destroying it, gets to the center, and Fumito is left there, where she ultimately ends up coming up to Fumito. Fumito puts the blade like right above his heart, and he's like, "You can do it now." So he ends up, so she actually ends up becoming what Fumito wanted to, and is able to kill a human. She ends up stabbing Fumito through, and Fumito starts talking about this, and he's like, "Oh," he ultimately ends up giving her a kiss, and then falling away, and then dying. And that's kind of like the main story of Blood-Sea ends. Now, this story, I didn't do a great job of explaining it. I know that much. I kind of shaped the high points and what happened, but it is not spoken of at all. This story was phenomenal to be as like underspoken of as it was. Like, I didn't know about Blood-Sea until I saw that scene, like I said, and it is great. Like, it's a great story. I would highly recommend going and watching it yourself, because I didn't do it justice. It is genuinely a phenomenal series, and like that concept of like the Truman Show aspect coming into it, I did not expect that at all. It hit me out of nowhere. Like, I knew Fumito was kind of odd, and I presumed he was going to be the main antagonist because he was really weird, but I was not expecting it to be like all this had been staged, all that was an experiment to acquire Fumito's blood and all that to try and experiment on humans. And also, I forgot to mention, but the Elder Baron that attacked Saya early on was actually the father of Mana, and Mana ends up telling Saya at one point that her father ended up researching too much into the tower and was ultimately captured, and she never saw from him again. Well, what Fumito had done was he was experimenting on humans to try and turn them into Elder Baron because he was trying to create his own Elder Baron. And with this, he ended up turning Mana's father into an Elder Baron, and he'd sent it out because of this. Well, he actually had escaped and was running amok, and Saya killed Mana's father technically right in front of her. But yeah, like I said, this story is phenomenal. Like, I really enjoyed it. I'd highly recommend going and watch it yourself. It's really not that much of the Blood Sea anime. It's only 12 episodes, and the movie's only like an hour and 50 minutes. So yeah, I highly recommend it. I love this story. It was great. It was exactly what I was looking for. It honestly kind of reminded me of, like, concept-wise of Neon Genesis Evangelion, but it's not too similar. I don't know. It just kind of reminded me of it a little bit. So that's why I was really enjoying it, because I'm really looking for something that's kind of similar to Neon Genesis Evangelion, but I haven't really been able to find it recently. At least like story-wise, I'm not looking for a mech anime. I'm looking for like a concept like Evangelion. But yeah, that's all there really was for the Blood-Sea story. I can't remember any plot points I really forgot. Like I said, Tadayoshi was able to turn to an Elder Baron because he was a hybrid just like Saya, and that's one thing that he mentioned about why he was glad to be her father there for a little bit, because he and her were similar in that regard. But yeah, oh, I don't think there's anything else big I've read. Oh yeah, the little dog dude that appears throughout the thing, he was actually a person who was able to grant wishes, and we actually learned that Saya had wished with him early on, and he stayed with her, and ultimately we see as he ends up coming back in the movie where they end up going talking, and Mana is shown him and all of that, and he's just a little dude who can grant wishes, so he's actually not that big of a character in terms of like the story. But yeah, so like I said, that's all there really was for it, and that's all I really have for episode 131 of Show Review. So thank you very much for watching.